When you think of great British sports cars, a few names come to mind. Lotus, Caterham, TVR. But one that doesn't get mentioned as much is Noble, and that's not because they aren't great. Far from it. It's just because they're as rare as hen's teeth and you barely ever see them. Well, in this video I have struck gold, and I'm going to be showing you what I think is the best Noble of the lot, the M12 GTO 3R. What's it like to drive? Was it ahead of its time? And not only that, but I'm going to share with you a few things that you might not know about the car, because I've been chatting to Mr. Lee Noble, you know, the founder of Noble Automotive and the genius behind this masterpiece, because I wanted to see if we could expect anything like this off him again in the future. So, if you haven't got one already, go grab yourself a cuppa, get sat down, and let's get into it. So before I get into this specific car, let me give you a quick rundown on what Noble Automotive is all about. They're a small company working out of Leicestershire, founded by Lee Noble back in 1999. Lee had been involved with various other lightweight sports cars in the past, Ultima, Pro Sport and Ascari to name a few, but he set out to build a more affordable supercar slayer that could proudly boast his surname on the front clamp. The idea was simple. Keep them as lightweight as possible, but instead of throwing a wet fart of an engine behind the seat, he was going to pop in a block that would rival the fastest supercars out at the time, but for a fraction of the cost. And well, he delivered. A Ferrari 360 Modena was £101,000 when it was released, and this very car, the M12 GTO 3R, was virtually half the price at £52,500. If you look at the performance figures side by side, it is extremely close, and you could argue that the only reason that you're paying an extra 50 Gs for the Ferrari is for the badge. Because although Noble delivered a quality product from the get-go, it didn't ooze prestige like the Ferrari did. However, for many car enthusiasts who just wanted the driving experience rather than to sit on luxurious Napa leather, the Noble was the clear choice. The 3-litre V6 twin-turbo Ford Duratec engine produced 352 brake horsepower in this. Not as much as its slightly older brother, the M400, which you might have seen over on JayEmm's channel. However, when I spoke to Mr. Noble, he said that the 3R was much more refined than the M400, and for that reason, it was his personal favourite. 0 to 60 miles per hour was over in less than 4 seconds, which is quick for modern standards, let alone a 20-year-old sports car. And the top speed was 185 miles an hour. So, unlike Lotuses of the time, it could really stretch its legs on the straights, as well as being just as good, if not better, through the corners. All thanks to its custom wishbone suspension and 𝙁𝘍 LSD. Obviously, to keep the cost of these cars down, Noble had to outsource parts, which isn't uncommon in the industry at all. Supercar manufacturers have been using parts from your everyday runaround for donkeys. If you've been keeping up with Matt Armstrong's Lamborghini rebuild, you'll know that even in a £250,000 Murcialago, you'll find an Audi A6 ashtray and Mark I focus indicators, and there'll be loads more stuff like that if you keep digging as well. Like the Lambo, what I found strange was that most of these repurposed parts that Noble were using weren't actually from other lightweight sports cars. Famously, it has Mark I Mondeo rear lights, but it doesn't stop there. It had door locks and hinges from a Rover Metro, a steering column from a Mark I Focus, steering rack from a Ford Scorpio, wing mirrors from a Rover 75, indicator stalks from an Escort, and that's just naming a few bits that you can see. Now clearly, they aren't performance cars, but they played a huge part in keeping the price of the M12 as low as possible. And it also meant that if something did go wrong, it was super cheap to fix, because it was just an off-the-shelf part from another manufacturer, rather than it being an ultra-rare limited run piece that Noble had created themselves. Even with its mashup of parts, the styling is superb. It's over 20 years old now, and although there are signs of yesteryear when you look hard enough, I think it's done a great job of standing the test of time. You can almost tell it's a distant relative of the Ultima and Ascari, and I think when Lee designed it, he's basically taken the best bits of every car he's ever been involved with, and put them all together to create something which kind of resembles a Ferrari F50 that's been on a hot wash. That might just be because it's red though, I don't know. What's it like to drive though? Well, this car has been set up for the track, or for very vigorous road driving, so it is extremely stiff. But when those twin turb skis spool up, you forget about everything else. It is addictive. 352 brake horsepower in something that weighs just over a ton is mental, and when there are no driving aids at all, you really have to be on your toes when this thing comes on boost, because even when it's dry, the back end easily breaks traction, and you're going to be snaking down that road. Now, the astonishing performance was too good to not take it racing, and whatever championship Noble were involved in, they absolutely smashed the opposition. A mid-engine sports car series which was expected to be dominated by Lotus Elises was destroyed by, you guessed it, a Noble. And when this car eventually evolved into the M400, which had 50 brake horsepower more than this, it took the Brit car series by storm. If you couldn't afford a Noble, you could still take one on the track. Virtually. Because what quite a lot of people don't know is they actually have their own video game. Noble Racing for the PS2, and as a guy who collects PlayStation games, I was extremely disappointed in myself to find out I didn't have a copy of it already. So of course I had to go out and get it. Now don't get me wrong, it's not going to rival Gran Turismo, but how cool's that? A small company like Noble developing their own game where you can unlock all of the different cars. Personally, I think it's brilliant, and it also gave me an idea for another video, so more about that in the future. This car is a classic example of finding a gap in the market at the right time. Lee himself said that the world was crying out for a car like the M12 to fill the void in between sports cars and supercars. But I mean, he still had to produce something half decent that was worthy of filling the space. And on the tight budget that he had, he couldn't afford to actually advertise the car, so the dreaded car journalists were his only option. It really was a proper make or break moment. Luckily though, he knew what he was doing and everyone loved it. Jeremy Clarkson said, "The Noble is to the world of cars what Gran Turismo is to computer games. It's better than anything else that money can buy. If you have the money, buy one. Purely as a driver's car, I think it's my favourite. I just love it. It's better than stuff costing 10 times as much." And I mean, obviously I'm no Clarkson, but I couldn't agree more. 20 years on and the analogue feel of this car is such an experience that you don't get in any modern sports car. And it'll never be replicated again, because you just can't build stuff like this anymore with all of the new regulations. Unfortunately, Lee is no longer involved with Noble. He parted ways with the company before the M600 went into production, and the story behind that deserves to be made into a film. It gives off major 𝙁𝘼𝙾𝙊𝙆 vibes, you know, the guy who was shafted by Ford after winning Le Mans. Well, it's not my story to tell, and I'm sure if Lee wants to share it, he'll be given a platform to do it. It is a massive shame though. Noble had the potential to go down as one of the greatest sports and supercar brands in the world. And although they still have this, which is definitely one of the greats, it just makes me wonder what could have been if the likes of the M15 was released instead of being scrapped. Because going off what everyone says about that car, it was another world beater. I did ask him if he was planning on making another lightweight sports car like the M12. He said that he'd like to, but he wasn't sure if he could. There's a lot more competition out there now, and they're all fighting for the same space. But if he did, the recipe would be the same. Fully analogue, nothing digital, purely back to basics driving. Oh, and by the way, I asked him, what does the M stand for? You know, M12, M400. Apparently, doesn't stand for anything. Just sounded good. I hope I've done this car justice. It is an amazing feat of engineering, thought up and built by an extremely talented bloke from Yorkshire, the greatest place on earth. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you tap that like button before you go, and drop me a comment down below too if you can think of any other sports car to do it better than Noble, because I'm struggling to think of any myself. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future. There's plenty of videos on there if you want to flick through them until then. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!